Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
And they're off in the Remsen. As they come on for the finish, and it's going to be tight here in the Remsen. Mo Donegal bearing down on the outside. It's Mo Donegal and early voting, and it is Mo Donegal to win the Wood Memorial. And it will be Mo Donegal to win the Test of the Champion, the Belmont Stakes.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV. I have with me Fred M. Crey, a best-selling author, an animal attorney, the recent writer of a book about the famed and great Calumet racehorse Alydar, who is probably most remembered for his rivalry with the Triple Crown winner Affirmed. We don't really have those rivalries in horse racing today because we have a different type of sport, and most of the horses retired before we can establish rivalries. But I don't think there's any doubt that Affirmed and Alydar was truly one of the greatest rivalries. And I don't think any of us who were around will ever forget the call of the Belmont when Alydar put a head in front and almost upset the Belmont Stakes and Triple Crown of Affirmed, only to see Affirmed and Steve Cauthen come back on the rail. Fred, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations on the book. I'm glad you wrote it, and I'm glad we're going to talk about it.
Well, I'm glad you're glad that I wrote it, because I'm not sure everybody will feel that way.
That's
true. Great to be
but...
on your show. It's great to be on your show. It was fun meeting you on Twitter, and I hope we keep in contact.
Absolutely. First, before we get into the book and Alydar and a lot of that stuff, you are an animal attorney, an animal lawyer.
Yes.
Can you tell everybody exactly what that is? I'm involved in animal rescue myself, as we've discussed. It's a big, important part of my life. What exactly is an animal lawyer?
Well, an animal lawyer is a lawyer that obviously is involved in helping animals. If you read the bio on my website, I grew up with a Great Dane, with my best friend. It was crushed when it died. I've always had dogs. And what I found was that people who get involved in the animal law process, they don't know what to do. They don't know what they're doing. And a case in point is I got a ticket one time for my dog not having a license but my dog had died before the license was due. And I had written the animal control and said, look, this is ridiculous. And they said, no, you have to come down and have a trial. Now, at this point, I was a lawyer. So I said, well, if it's a trial, this will be fun. So I went down there, and it was not really a court. It was more like a grocery store kind of deal. Everybody's in line. They take a ticket. So I get up there, and the guy says, okay, he's from the county. He says, you've got a dog. It wasn't properly licensed. You owe, $80. And I said, well, the judge says to me, well, what do you say about that? I said, well, I want to ask the guy questions. So I asked him questions, and he didn't really know anything. He was on a computer. So I said, Judge, I've got the ashes from my dog's death. And I put them up on the top of the table. And I said, you can see from the cremation certificate that he died well before this license was due. And the judge looked at the county attorney and he said, he's got you there. And everybody in the audience laughed and clapped because and so he got very angry. The guy from the county picked him up and said, you could have faked the name on this, and I'm going to go copy it. So he left, and I leaned over to the judge and I said, listen, man, I'm a lawyer. I try cases for a living. There's nothing here that you can appeal. He has put nothing in that's, contrary to what I'm saying. And I've got the evidence. He doesn't have any evidence. And the judge leaned over to me and he said, you know what? He's just mad because he lost. And I thought when I went home that day, what a way to run animal control, that you're doing these kinds of things. They're supposed to be working for us. And they're doing these things because they're mad because they lost. And that's when I started doing animal law. And animal law can involve so many different kinds of cases. I mean, the most exciting case I ever had was somebody stole a Great Dane, believe it or not. And we had to get it back, and they wouldn't give it back. So we had to hire a SWAT team. And when you hire a SWAT team, you have to pay extra money because they have to be able to use deadly force to break into the house. So 10 o'clock at night, Thursday night, we're driving to this guy's house, 4 cop cars, all the sirens going. I'm in the back because I have to identify the Great Dane. We get out, the guy comes out, and the cop says to him, look, we're here for this Great Dane. And he goes, well, it's not here. And he said, sir, I hear you. But you have to realize we have a search warrant, and we cannot take your word for it. So we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We can either break down all your doors looking for this Great Dane, or you can bring him out here right now. And of course, he brought it out there right now. So, and there are a lot of different, so there's that. There's if your dog bites somebody and they want to put it to sleep, I would come and try and defend your dog from being labeled a dangerous dog.
Okay.
There's veterinary malpractice where, somebody does something on your dog and it dies and because they made a mistake. There is one of the most interesting aspects of law that I practiced was people identifying pit bulls by just looking at them. And it was interesting because we ended up going to California and getting the expert in the dog genome and talking about, how likely is it if you have 2 purebred parents that the dog they have looks like them. And so the truth is that there's no scientific repeatable way to look at a dog and say it's a certain breed. So we defended a bunch of pit bulls on that, and we won every case about that.
Right.
Because
it's interesting because everything that you're describing, through my involvement with rescue and animal welfare, and we work with my wife and I work with a lot of abused and abandoned animals. I've experienced and seen firsthand a lot of what you're talking about. One of the things I find extremely frustrating about animal law is the fact that animals are in most states considered just property.
Yes.
And the owners have, I don't want to say a completely free hand, but a lot of leeway in what they do and how they treat them and what actually constitutes cruelty.
Yes.
And you see things like people, taking, cropping ears themselves without having a vet doing it, which, I don't believe in cropping ears at all.
Yeah.
But certainly if it's going to be done, it should be done under the right circumstances by a veterinarian. And some of the cases we've referred to the sheriff, and we're lucky we have a very proactive animal loving sheriff in our county. But there are many cases that they don't get involved in because they just can't, or the laws are not, favorable or strong enough to allow them to get involved. And that's been extremely frustrating to me, dealing with these dogs and seeing what some people do and actually get away with.
It's funny, when I was in Miami, there was a dog that was left to guard a house when the people moved out. It didn't have any food and water, so I'd climb over the fence and give it to him. So I went to him to a very animal friendly Miami policeman and said, actually a woman. And I said, listen, should I call animal control on these people? And she said, no, they can hardly come out and pick up a dead dog. She said, you tell me where it is and it will disappear. And there was this underground railroad for dogs, like in this situation. And sometimes I don't know any more about it, don't want to know any more about it, but sometimes that's all that's left.
Yes, and I've experienced that myself as well, and sometimes it's literally a godsend.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
we're all going to get arrested now for the show.
Nah, I don't think so. I think we'll be all right. But it's just it's an unfortunate thing. But I'm glad that there are people like you out there, doing what you do and helping.
It's really rewarding.
Others. Yeah.
I've handled multi-million-dollar cases in civil cases, and seeing a dog get reunited. I have a picture on my website of Brandy. Brandy was declared a dangerous dog. The jurisdiction that arrested her was the wrong jurisdiction, and had the wrong law, and they refused to change it. But eventually, they let her out. But when those two hugged after being apart, it is the most rewarding part of living that you can experience.
I certainly can understand. And if I've seen 1,000 or 10,000 dog bite or vicious dog cases, I would say 99.9% of them go back to the dog being put in a no-win situation, or just people not knowing how to handle, treat, or adjust to the dog. What you find when you do a lot of it as a lawyer is a lot of times these dogs are used as pawns in neighborhood disputes. So if you don't like your neighbor and the dog does something, you call animal control, and it becomes this big, thing that it really cannot be. It's crazy how people are. Right. Yeah, no, I know. I have several dogs. Two of them. I have a Cane Corso and a Rottweiler.
Big dude.
They're guard dogs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're instinctively guard dogs.
Yeah.
You don't have to teach them to be guard dogs. You have to teach them that not everybody's an enemy. Instinctively they know, to be protective, and they're extremely protective, and they're both super intelligent and great. But I have my house set up and fenced in a way that is really, when people say it, they're like, wow, your house is like really secure. You're worried about people breaking in. I'm like, no, not exactly. I'm worried more about my dogs, because if they break in, I know what's going to happen. And I just don't want to have to deal with defending my dogs. You know what I mean? Yeah. And some people are very just completely oblivious. Like when we put up our fence, the city required it to be inspected. Okay. So the inspector calls me up and says, listen, we're going to come out and inspect the fence. I said, well, I've got some big dogs. You've got to kind of let me know when you're coming. He goes, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to leave your fence open on Tuesday. I'm like, listen, I can't do that. It's for your protection. He goes, it's not for my protection. Don't worry about it. You have to leave your fence open Tuesday. I have to be able to get there whenever I get there and walk on the property. I'm like, okay, well, I'll leave it unlocked and closed, but please call me or text me so I make sure my dogs are inside. Okay, I will. Sure enough, I'm outside. Guy comes walking back there. Okay, now fortunately the dogs were away. So the guy says, whoa. I says, you're walking on my property. I get you're a city inspector, but I told you about my dogs. I said, they'd have killed you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then they're going to put my dogs down because you're basically an idiot. He goes, "You're not going to kill me, blah, blah, blah. I'm armed." I said, "Listen," I said, "I don't care if you're armed." I said, "Unless you come back here shooting before you get that gun out, you're going to have one on your throat, the other one between your legs. They're going to tear you apart. You're not, and I'm going to be in trouble because, again, you're an idiot, you know?"
Well,
And
there's actually a
he-
case. There's a case on that. There's a legal case where it's very similar to what you just said, where a guy who's doing pest control comes and says, "Look, I'm going to do pest control," and the lady specifically says to him, "Look, I've got my dogs in the house. Don't go in the house until you tell me so I can put them outside." So the guy doesn't do it. He goes in and he gets bit, and so he sues. And the court ruled, "Look, you were trespassing. Too bad for you."
I'm surprised because usually they go against the dogs. You know.
Yeah, well, it's strict liability if your dog does
Right.
something reliable. But
And that's
in that
why
particular
I'm
case,
super careful.
yeah, and you should be.
You
You should
know,
be.
even I even went to the point where I live on the water, so they restrict what you can do with the fences. So I have to have
Right.
chain link so I don't obstruct my neighbor's views of the water.
Right.
So I have palm trees at each end of my backyard, and I have it cordoned off with another fence.
Yeah.
Because that keeps my neighbors from coming right up to my chain link fence.
Right.
They can't get to it, and my dogs from going up there because the neighbors, they think they're playing. They think, you know, if they ever get a dog, they could be fence fighting. So it looks kind of ridiculous and awkward, but it's for their protection and my dog's protection. And we actually went to that extreme just to keep my dogs they can't get to the chain link fence right next to the neighbor yard that's cordoned off with those two big palm trees. Let's get to Alydar because
let's segue into why I love animals, and that's why I love Alydar, is because he that's part of what drove me to write the book, was my love for Alydar.
Okay.
And,
how did you become familiar with Alydar? Are you a racing fan, or is?
Well, what happened was, I lived in Atlantic City when I was growing up, which had a racetrack there, which now
Absolutely.
I wasn't involved in that, but when I went to law school in Nebraska, a friend of mine worked at the track as a parimutuel clerk, and so he said, "Hey, man, come over here for the summer and work in the parimutuel clerk as a parimutuel clerk." So I worked there for 3 years, and that got me into horse racing. Obviously, in Nebraska, the
Oxide Bend, right? Oxide Bend
is Exarban. What happens in Nebraska is that the track moves during the summer. So it's in Exarban is Nebraska backwards.
Okay.
And it's in Omaha at first, and then it goes to Lincoln, and then it goes to Columbus. So I was working in Lincoln, and I got to, being a parimutuel clerk, you get access to, the backside, you get access to to see the horses. And I really loved horses because they have a quiet, noble sort of personality. You look in their eye and it's like they see you. I don't know how to describe it, but I fell in love with horses there. I wasn't really into betting or anything, but people from the backside would come in and give you hot tips, and some of them panned out and some of them didn't.
Right.
And then after that, I moved to Miami and practiced law there for 25 years. And in '78, I went to Hialeah Park and saw Alydar run in the Flamingo Stakes.
Okay.
And I fell in love with him there. I mean, he was big, burly, but in the stretch one run, when you watched him, he was so determined. So you could tell he was giving it 2,000%. And so I fell in love with him there, and I actually followed him to Gulfstream in the Florida Derby. And then after that, I kind of went back to work. I followed him into Triple Crown, and I kind of lost track of him. Then after I retired from the law, not the animal law, I came in later, but after I retired from doing that, I moved to Gainesville, and I went to Ocala on a horse tour because I wanted to find Dr. Fager's headstone. It's in Ocala, and I wanted to see it. So I went on a horse tour, and the lady's there, and she said to me, "Hey, who's your favorite horse?" I said, "Alydar's my favorite horse." And she said, "Well, there's a lady here that was at Calumet when Alydar was there." And I said, "Well, that'd be great. Let me talk to her." So she comes over, and I said, "Listen, I heard, you were there when Alydar was there. What happened to Alydar?" And she said, "Everybody on the farm knows what happened to Alydar. You could not get to that horse. It had so much security, you couldn't get within 50 yards of that barn without people coming out and saying, 'Hey, what are you doing here?'" And I said, so, what happened?" And she said, "I'm not going to talk to you about it because I'm afraid for my life and I'm afraid for my children's life." And that was all I got out of her. But I thought to myself, that is a very strange thing to say 35 years later after the fact. So what I found out was there were rumors at the time that Alydar was hurt that the mafia was involved. And it's true that J.T. Lundy did business with mafia-related farms in Ocala. And he actually had a relationship with a guy down in Ocala where he would send horses to train with him. And when he wanted to not be found after everything went down, after he was arrested and after he went bankrupt, he came down to Ocala and hid. Because when you're the best place to hide, if you're trying to hide, is at a horse farm, because there's a big gate there with a keypad. You can't get in there. You can't even get in there to ring a doorbell. I mean, it's either somebody comes out to that gate and lets you in. I ran into this 5 or 6 times trying to interview people for my book, and you just can't get in. So after she said that, my interest was piqued. I went and read everything on the internet. I then decided, I found out that the cases that were tried against the groom who was on duty that night and J.T. Lundy were appealed, which meant that there's transcripts of those trials. So I flew to Houston and got the transcripts. And, like I do, I would used to get cases, right at the last minute. You go through everything and analyze it. And I decided that for me, the physical evidence that was there was not enough to be consistent with a horse being alone at night in his stall at 10 o'clock and just deciding with his right rear leg to kick the stall door. I never bought that. And as I got into investigating the case, what I found was the reason the case was dropped from the public eye was because there was $36.5 million worth of insurance on Alydar. And that insurance was paid. And so to the general public, if an insurance company is going to pay $36.5 million for a claim, they're not going to just do it because whatever. They're going to investigate it, and they're going to find out it's a righteous claim, and they're going to pay it. But what they didn't know was how little investigation was actually done to pay that money. And
it was Lloyd's, correct? Lloyd's was the carrier?
No, there were two. There was Lloyd's of London had, I think, 21.5 million, and Golden Eagle had 5 million.
Okay.
And so here's when Tom Dixon from Lloyd's of London went to investigate this claim. This is what he did. He was called that night. He went out to the barn. He took pictures of the front of the barn door, the back of the barn door, and the injury to Alydar's leg. He talked to Lundy. He talked to Dr. Bramlage. He took Alton Stone, who was the groom who was in charge, the night watchman, and that was it. That's all he did. What did Dr.
Bramlage tell him?
Dr. Bramlage went looking for an accident, and that's what he found. Imagine you're Dr. Bramlage, and you've got a $36.5 million horse that is the sire of the year in 1990, and you're tasked with finding out, was it something intentional or something accidental? And you've got all of horse racing watching. I believe, it's my opinion, that there was a lot of pressure on Dr. Bramlage and everybody to find this to be an accident, because otherwise it would be a huge stain on horse racing that somebody killed this beautiful horse for the insurance money. So they had that small investigation, and Dr. Bramlage said that he believed that Alydar kicked his stall door, pushed out the stall door from the wall and got his hoof caught there, twisted it and fell and broke it. So that was the theory that everybody came up with. And that what's interesting is that although that's the theory Dr. Bramlage came up with, that's not what is in Tom Dixon's reports. So if you go to my website, this book is very interactive. So you read the book, but you also go to the website. You can see the pictures that Tom Dixon took that night and look for yourself. Do you see a mark on there that is consistent with a horse who has a 7,000 pound a bone, that's cannon bone, that can withstand 7,000 pounds? Does it look like that happened? Because Tom Dixon had no pictures of any damage done that was new to that door or to the bricks that surrounded the stall door. There were no marks. They were in devil's red, like this color, painted. If somebody had scuffed it or something like that, it would be there. So Bramlage comes up with that. But if you read the reports from Dixon to Lloyd's, what they're paying on is that Alydar kicked the door directly and broke his cannon bone. So if you read all of the records that he sent, when Bramlage writes his report, he doesn't even say anything about how the accident happened. So you got Tom writing all these reports. He says that the horse kicked the stallion. The stallion kicked the stall door directly and broke his bone, and that's what Lloyd's paid on. But that's not what Dr. Bramlage's theory was. So there's that disconnect between what Tom wrote and what Dr. Bramlage thinks. But it really didn't matter, because that's what they paid on. And once they paid, what company wants to go back and say, oops, we made a mistake with this $36.5 million claim. Let's reinvestigate it. That would never happen.
Right.
So Tom Dixon knew that he was told originally that by Lundy that somebody was in the office, heard a sound, went out and saw Alydar with his broken leg. And when Tom then took Alton Stone, who was the substitute night watchman's statement, he just said, look, I came back, I found the horse, I called people. What's interesting about that is that the night watchman was substituting for the regular night watchman, but Tom Dixon never asked him about that. Nobody ever asked him about that. And so they closed the file and it's over with. And what I can tell you is that nobody who was a horseman or a farmhand or in the horse business believed that it was an accident. You know, they looked at the stall, they looked at what happened. And so now I'm going to tell you what happened when Terry McVeigh, who represented Golden Eagle, came out, and what happened with him.
Okay.
So Tom Dixon goes out the night of November 13th, and he's there till the night, and then he goes home. He represents the 21-5 from Golden Eagle. I'm sorry, from Lloyd's of London. Right. Terry McVeigh gets hired by Golden Eagle, and Golden Eagle says, go over there the next day and take pictures.
So they're the excess carrier, Golden Eagle.
It's not an excess carrier. They're co-primary.
Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. So Terry McVeigh boss Brian Chambers says, look, we heard Alydar was injured. Go over there and check it out. So Terry McVeigh goes over at 9 o'clock and, goes to the gate and says, I'm here to investigate the claim. And they say, we're sorry, you're not allowed in. And he goes, what? I've got a $5 million claim. And they said, well, our orders are you're not allowed in. So he now drives back to his office and calls up Brian Chambers and said, look, they're not letting me in. And Chambers gets angry. He says, well, they have to let you in. The insurance policy, as we all know, requires cooperation from the insured. And if you don't cooperate, you don't have to pay.
Right.
So Chambers calls up the broker and calls up Calumet and says, if you don't let him in, you're not, we're going to reserve our rights to pay. They then say, okay. So Terry McVeigh gets there at 2:00 the next day and they let him in. He goes to Lundy and he says, okay, Lundy, show me to the stall. And so he goes to the stall and it's been completely sanitized. So the hay is all completely perfectly there. Whatever blood there may or may not have been from the horse, having a broken leg and kicking it around, there's no blood. There's 2 bolts that hold in a roller bracket when you slide the door. Those had been broken off. They really turned out to be a red herring because those bolts were so rusted that they didn't really do anything in terms of how much force would be required to kick the door out. Anyway, those bolts have been thrown out. And the bracket that goes in there had been re-drilled and put back where it was. So Terry's there and he goes, I don't have anything to take pictures of. And furthermore, it doesn't look like a horse has ever been in here. And Terry McVeigh is already saying, there's something wrong with this claim. And I asked him when I interviewed him, had Calumet had other claims? Do they know that if you've got a $36.5 million claim, you let the evidence stay where it is before, you do anything with it? He said, yeah, they knew. Now we have that fishy. That's fishy. Okay. But still, what happened was, since everything was done, and because Lloyd's had paid $21.5 million, Golden Eagle's in a spot where they can't say, well, we're not going to pay, because Lloyd's has already paid a claim 4 times that much.
Well, if they're co-insurance, if they're co-primary insurance, they're not a following form, so they could have said we're not going to pay.
They could have said, but they didn't. What happened was they wanted to do more, and before they even started to do more, Calumet hired a lawyer, and they said, look, it all got into that, and so Golden Eagle eventually pays their $5 million. And that's the end of it as far as everybody's concerned. But what I'm trying to say is there was suspicion by Terry McVeigh. He lost his report, so I never got to read them, but he told Brian Chambers testified to this in trial that, they were, both of them questioned this claim, but they didn't have any evidence. Everything was thrown out. So what happened then was that was it. There were a lot of rumors. There was a lot of stuff, but legally and investigatorially, there was nothing more further they could do.
Well, let me interject one thing from different perspective, because I was a huge fan of racing at this time, huge fan of Alydar, and was plugged into the racing community. So yeah, most of the rumors that you're mentioning, I had probably heard.
Yeah.
And what was the theory and what was floated around amongst, and I'm not going to say, all the nonsensical rumors or but amongst the people I would say are people that are in the know or plugged into the racing community. The story that floated around widespread at the time amongst the racing community was that this Lundy guy married into the Calumet farm.
True. Okay. Absolutely true.
Destroyed his wife and the farm financially. Okay. Yes. With a systematic, reckless abandonment of spending and lavishness, and ultimately wound up in financial trouble that he could not get out of.
Yes.
And killed Alydar for the insurance money to bail himself out, not really the farm per se. And the rumor was that he actually either had or broke his leg with a hammer himself, and they came up with the door story.
Right. And there's a lot of truth to everything you say, but the problem was that until nobody really knew how badly Calumet was in debt. So to put this in perspective, when Lucille Markey Wright died, the farm was in the black. 10 years later, Calumet declared bankruptcy with $160 million worth of debt. In 10 years, that's what they spent.
Now, the other rumor, and you may know the answer to this, but we might as well ask it and get it out there now. And if it is true, it's quite sad. But several years ago, probably the late 90s or early 2000s, I was still going to Gulfstream Park on a daily basis. And someone, again, very well plugged into the racing community, I got into a conversation about Calumet Farm and their history and their legacy and everything. And I was told that the woman that Lundy had married, okay, was left so destitute and was left literally penniless. And she was actually working, I was told, as a chambermaid.
That's true.
At a Holiday Inn not far from Gulfstream Park. And it broke my heart. I couldn't actually fathom that this guy destroyed that kind of fortune of this woman. And now you're confirming it, and it's
I can't confirm where she was working, but she was cleaning. Yeah, she was doing cleaning.
Well, my source was pretty good, so I would say it's probably the Holiday Inn near, not far from Gulfstream Park that they told me, which is tragic considering the horse ran.
What Lundy did, to put that in perspective, what Lundy did was, as he was getting more and more debt, he would get the heirs to sign personal guarantees to some of the loans. And so what happened at the end was, not only did Calumet Farm go bankrupt, but a lot of the heirs, their money was also lost because they signed personal guarantees. Now,
so he didn't only dupe the woman he married, he duped the family.
Yes, there were 4 heirs. None of them knew how to run a horse farm. They all let Lundy do it because he was the only one who knew anything. And he had planned taking over Calumet since he was in high school. And so that was his goal. And he had planned it before it happened. He wrote letters telling people that he was going to fire him when he took over. It's a pretty amazing story when you think, he was a son of a tenement farmer and not very well educated. And his idea was, when he took over Calumet, I'm a son of a tenant farmer redneck, and I'm going to spend the most money and do what I want and show everybody else that I'm just as good as they are. But so,
he's still alive?
Yes, he is. I went to his house to talk to him, and I thought, he'd be hiding out and nobody would know. But it's a very well known in Lexington. It's a pretty open secret where he lives. I went to his house. I tried to talk to everybody who.
He spoke to you?
He spoke to me, but not in any meaningful way. I went up to his house. He lives in his mother's house that was deeded to his sister. His sister's name's Kathy Lundy Jones. And I'm guessing that his mother deeded it to his sister because they were afraid that if Lundy got it, maybe it would go to the creditors, because they're still creditors after all this time.
Right.
And so she lets him live in it rent free. And she also helps pay, some of the utilities and stuff like that. So I went to his house, went up on the porch, looked through the window, and he was sitting in there watching a small TV. Knocked on the door. He had a picture, I think, of a horse, maybe Alydar, on the wall. He came over to me and opened the door. I said, "Hi, I'm Fred Crey. I'm writing a book about Alydar." And he came out onto the porch and said, "I'm not going to say anything about that. Everything I've ever said is on fucking paper." Meaning he's been to trial, but he's never really talked about it in any meaningful way. I don't have anything to do with it. And what was strange was that after that, he completely changed. His complete demeanor changed. And he said, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "I'm really sorry. I can't help you with that." And it sounded sincere, like he was really sorry he couldn't help me. But before that, it was all anger and, all that. So I got to it was just a strange thing. I went home and that's all he ever said to me. He's never said anything to anybody other than to deny it. And he didn't testify at his trial. But to get back to the story died after the insurance companies paid their money. And everybody in Lexington said, we don't believe it. There was a big mafia thing because of the mafia connection he had. But it didn't start back until like 8 years later when the bank, First City National of Houston, they failed, and the FDIC took them over, and the assistant state attorney for the federal government started looking at their records, and they found all these loans, and they found Alydar as being collateral, and they thought, who is this Alydar? They don't know anything about horse racing in Houston. And why is a Houston bank lending, $40 million to an equine farm when they have no experience in that kind of loan? It was very, and they started to investigate. And the first thing they did was go down and talk to Alton Stone. And Alton Stone said, well, I was substituting for the regular night watchman. And Tom Dixon did this, but he never talked to the guy who substituted. So they go to this guy, his name is Cowboy Kip. And he's the regular night watchman, so what he tells the FBI investigator is the Tuesday before Alydar was killed, a guy in the Calumet car drove up to me, got out while I was getting ready to go on, and told me, hey man, we're worried you're getting burned out. You need to take the night off. And he said, listen, I don't want to take the night off. I work every night. I like my job. And he got the vibe that they were saying, look, you're taking the night off, whether you like it or not. And he didn't want to make waves. So he said, okay, I'll take the night off. And he said, well, what night do you want me to take off? And they said, Tuesday, November 13th. He said, okay. Now, isn't it completely suspicious that the night that he takes the night off is the night that Alydar gets hurt? That's the first time anybody has ever heard that happen.
Who subbed for him?
Alton Stone.
Okay.
So Alton Stone is a broodmare on the broodmare crew. He takes that job. And of course, he's not going to do the job the way Cowboy Kip does it. And Calumet is a 720-acre farm. And what that night watchman has to do is he has to leave the stallion barn and walk around to the other barns. And he's usually gone for like an hour. Now, to put this in context, 6 months before this or a year before this, Calumet was paying a guy to sit in the stallion barn all night just for that reason. Because in that stallion barn is Affirmed, Alydar, Secreto, Capote, and Magambo. And those horses, I think it was Secreto and Capote, they paid $50 million for those horses. So you've got $86.5 million at least of horses in this stallion barn that are left alone for an hour.
This is 1990, so 86 million then is probably 300, 400 million today.
Whatever.
I don't know.
And there's no cameras. There's nothing. And so if you know these facts, you immediately know that Calumet is in such financial difficulty that they cannot afford to pay a man a minimum wage to sit in the stallion barn and just sit there. So they had a guy there doing that, and they got rid of him. And then they told Cowboy Kip, you're going to have to do the whole farm. So now Alton Stone is there. And Alton Stone, he's asked what happened. And he says, I had a premonition that something happened to Alydar, which sounds fishy already. All of a sudden at 10 o'clock, he has a premonition. Anyway, he goes in there, he finds the horse hurt, and he calls the vet that lives there. There's a vet that lives on the premises, and he calls us the broodmare manager who takes care of all the personnel. And they come out there, and then, then it all starts. But nobody knew this whole substitute thing, this thing that, and when they went to the grand jury, the first thing they said was, that is suspicious. It's suspicious that the night he takes off is the night Alydar gets hurt. And then you have, after that, you then have the month before, Golden Eagle writes a letter to Calumet saying, we are not renewing your policy of $5 million. You're behind on your premiums. We're tired of chasing them. And so that policy is going to end in December. So if Alydar is going to get all the money out of his insurance policy, it's got to be done before December, or that policy is going to lapse. On top of that, right before this occurs, First City National Bank of Houston has already told Calumet, you owe us $40 million, and if you don't pay it, we have the right to foreclose on the farm. And so now you've got all of these circumstantial facts adding up all at one time. You've got the insurance company denying that they're going to, renew the policy. You've got the guy taking the night off. You've got all this, you've got all of the financial things coming to a head. And so now Calumet has to come up with at least the principal payment on this loan to First National of Houston. And if they don't, they have the right to foreclose on the farm. So they have no cash, none. John Ward, who took over Calumet after it declared bankruptcy, said, we had to get a loan to make payroll. We had to get a loan to make the premium payments to insure the horses. So they only had one asset, okay? And that was the insurance money. The other thing that people didn't know is that Alydar, although he was making $250,000 per cover, they had sold all of his seasons in advance. So in 1988, they had sold, $2 million worth of Alydar seasons, and it allowed them to bring in that money now, okay, and spend it. But they weren't bringing in any money in 1990 enough to keep the farm afloat. And so Carol Flake wrote an article around after this incident happened, and basically said Alydar was a maxed out credit card, and there was no way that he could make enough money to keep the farm afloat. So you have all of these things going on. And to me, and to the assistant U.S. attorney, they felt the horse was killed for the insurance money. So the first thing they did was they charged the groom, Alton Stone, and they said, we know what happened that night because you were out there. And they arrested him for lying to the grand jury, which he did tell different stories to the grand jury and afterwards. And so there was no doubt that that was the case, but there was also no doubt that he got no money. They never showed that he got any benefit from the horse dying. And what they did was they arrested him because they thought he would turn and implicate Lundy. Now, he had just gotten married. He had no money. He lived in Kentucky. The trial was in Houston, so everybody had to fly to Houston. Alton Stone had to borrow money to fly to Houston to go to his trial. And none of his relatives could come to testify because they couldn't afford to go. So he goes, and it turns out they have many meetings, and they're trying to get him to turn, and he keeps telling them, I don't know anything. I came, the horse was injured. That's all I know. They go to trial on his case, and they prove that, he's told many different stories. But what they don't do is they don't have a theory of how Alydar got hurt intentionally. So in the groom trial, all we hear is Larry Bramlett saying, I think that he got his hoof caught in the door and it broke. The prosecution tried to get an expert, but no expert wants to go against Larry Bramlett. And I can tell you that from experience. When I tried to get an orthopedic surgeon or somebody to look at this, as soon as I said, well, Larry Bramlage, that was the end of the conversation. He's just too famous.
Right.
So after the groom was convicted, they then went and tried to convict Lundy and Matthews, who ran Calumet, of insurance fraud. And they did that. He was convicted. Then what they wanted to do was, in the sentencing hearing, they wanted to prove that he killed Alydar. And so they hired a guy from MIT named George Pratt. And he wrote a report that said, there's some of his report, and this report is on my website if you want to read it. There's a report that says, I don't think the horse could have generated enough force to kick the door out and break his leg. And I agree with that. The way it was his right rear cannon bone, he would have had to be a certain way. But we get back to, where's the damage of that kick? And so the problem is that because the bolts are broken, he can't really give an opinion that's any good about how much force it would take. And the prosecution didn't do their job in making sure that he just considered how heavy that door was. So he ends up, and his theory of how Alydar got killed is completely just unbelievable to me. What he says is that they tied a rope to his leg, they put it up through the doors of the bars of the stall door, and then got a piece of farm machinery and killed it and pulled it and lifted it up and broke it. First of all, there's no farm machinery there. Second of all, there's no evidence that there was farm machinery in there. It was really, to me, the prosecution just trying to find some way to have this be intentional. So, of course, the defense put up Tom Dixon. I think it was an accident. Larry Bramlage saying it was an accident. And here's an interesting thing. John Ward is the trainer of Monarchos, who won the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I know who he is very well.
And he took over Calumet after Lundy quit. And so he testified in both cases about the financial aspects of it. So when I interviewed him, I said, hey, you're at the farm, you're there. Didn't you ever think, how did this happen? He said, yeah, and I think I know how it happened. And I said, well, tell me. Now, meanwhile, they never asked this in court. And they could have. He was there as a witness. He said, what I think happened was that somebody came into the barn. They put a lip thing on him. They pulled him over and they lifted up his right rear cannon bone and pinned it between the stall wall and the door. So it's caught. It's like this, and then there's a door here and then wall here. And then they jam it there and they let it sit there for 5 minutes. And as he struggles, he breaks it. So that is a very believable theory. I asked Dr. Bramlage, did he believe it? Of course, he doesn't believe anything that's his theory. And one of the things that Larry Bramlage testified to, and so did Dr. Baker, is that because the x-rays look a certain way, that proves that he twisted his leg, and that's how he broke it. So I went to Dr. Susan Stover, and she is a person who investigated the deaths at Santa Anita.
Okay.
And she knows.
Let me stop you for a second. Okay. Let's take a quick break for a second and come back on, because the show's going long. We'll take a quick break and we'll come right back on. Okay.
Whatever you want to do, man.
All right. Because this is fascinating stuff, and I can't wait to hear what she had to say. Yeah. And I've got a bunch of questions when we get there. So let's take a quick break and we'll come right back.
All right.
Okay, we're back.
So I probably talked to 30 doctors, none of whom would even look at the x-rays.
But she did.
She did. But let me backtrack. So when they go to trial and they want to prosecute these people, they subpoena the x-rays and the medical records of Alydar for what happened that night. And guess what? They're gone. And the lady who is in charge of putting him in the file, and all that is this lady, Linda Rhodes Stewart. And she said, look, I put him in there. I went back when they had the dispersal sale and everything was gone. The x-rays. And of course they asked, who has access to that? J.T. Lundy. The only reason we have the x-rays is that Tom Dixon brilliantly took pictures of them. So we have pictures of the x-rays. So I got Susan Stover to take pictures of the x-rays. And I said, listen, can you take pictures of these x-rays? Look at these x-rays and tell me, because Larry Bramlage and Dr. Baker are saying that these x-rays rule out that Alydar was hit with a baseball bat or a crowbar, and that's what broke his leg. And she wrote me back and said, you cannot rule out that this injury is a result of a crowbar or a baseball bat being hit on the leg. So right away, Dr. Bramlage has now, based on her opinion, a controversy over what he says. And I asked him about it. So I said, this is your opinion. Yes, he got it caught in there and all that. And I said, well, what do you think of Susan Stover? He said, initially, before he knew that I was using her, he said, no, she's a good doctor. She knows what she's doing. And so I said, well, what if she says this? And he said, well, she's not in my area of expertise. So, she's not qualified, la, 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 la. So anyway, we all know in court, opinions are opinions. That's his opinion. If I'm going to court, that's the lady I'm bringing. And she's going to say, listen, I investigated all of Santa Anita's deaths. I've looked at MRIs of broken legs. She's done all that stuff. In my opinion, she's better qualified than Larry Bramlage to discuss this matter. John Ward said, Larry's right that he got his leg caught. I'm just saying he got it caught on the other side. But they never asked it. They never asked John Ward that, even though he appeared in both trials. So I think the lawyers missed a little bit of,
So John Ward is of the opinion that it was an accident, that he got his leg hung up.
No, John Ward is of the opinion that somebody intentionally backed that horse back to the door.
Okay.
The lip shank, lifted up his leg, and then pinned it between the door and the stall wall, the stall door and the edge of the stall. So that it would be like this. And then on both sides, you put your weight on there and you hold it there. And the horse struck, and basically what he said was, I've seen things like this before, but they were accidents.
Right.
This is what he thought happened. This theory never has seen the light of day until my book. Nobody's ever heard of it.
Right. Well, I heard, like I said, on the backside, similar theory that it was put in the stall door and locked in there and then just hit with a hammer.
Okay, so the theory, so that now there are four theories. Now you got to keep track of them. There's Tom Dixon's theory that he just kicked the door and broke his cannonball. That theory doesn't really hold water because what another thing that came up here is Bill Knack wrote an article in Sports Illustrated called Questions About Alydar. And he said, listen, I've talked to vets and they don't believe a direct kick can cause this kind of break, because that's the leg that goes down on the ground and holds 7,000 pounds of horse. And so if you have a direct kick, it's not possible. And it's after the Sports Illustrated article comes out that Larry Bramlage really brings out this foot caught in the door thing, because he wants, it's all out there now. He has to answer that. Right. And all this is in my book. I actually have the Sports Illustrated article. I have all the interviews that Larry gave up to and after this. And you can see that this is the first time he explains it is after the Sports Illustrated article. So, so there's there's Tom Dixon's theory of the direct kick. There's Dr. Bramlage of the getting foot caught in the door. Then there's John Ward's theory that it was on the other side of the door, jammed in between the door and the edge of the stall. And then there's the theory that he got hit with a crowbar. So how did I come up with that theory? I interviewed Tommy Burns. Tommy Burns has his nickname is the Sandman, and he was the guy who electrocuted and killed 14 show horses for the insurance money. And he was arrested. He actually was arrested when he was in Gainesville with Arlo Harley and was breaking a racehorse's leg with a crowbar called Streetwise. And so they caught him doing that, and they arrested him, and his penance was to go and testify against all these other 15 people. So I had Tommy look at the stall wall, stall door, and I had every groom and every horseman that I talked to look at it. And uniformly, they all said that Bramlege's theory was not believable. They all thought that there would be, I even interviewed Gregory Clark, who was Affirmed's groom at Calumet. And they all said, this can't happen with no physical evidence on the door. It can't happen with no mark on the cement that's there. It's next to the stall door. It can't happen. There's a little latch in the front that keeps the door from being opened by the horse from the inside with his nose. That latch was intact. And there's also on the bottom of the door, there's 2 door stops that curve over the front that would prevent the door from going out. People say, look, if you got his hoof out there, how did he ever get it back in? The door would have closed. How did he get it back in? There's just, to me and Tommy Burns, the most likely thing is that somebody, because it's the fastest. You know, if you do the thing that John Ward says, it takes too much time. You've got to let the horse struggle for several minutes before he does it. The other 2 theories, the direct kick and the caught in the stall door, there's no physical evidence for that. You have the night watchman out, but you don't know how long he's going to be gone. So you need to do something fast and quick and get out of there. And so the best way to do that would be to put a towel over Alydar's eyes, lip shank him, squeeze in there, hit it, and get out. And that's what Tommy Burns, that's his opinion of what happened. And that's what this case has always missed, is, sad to say, an expert in how to kill horses. And his thing was, look, if I did this, I do it exactly the way it was done. Because in order for this to be an accident, that roller bracket has to be broken off to explain what happened. If it's not broken off, you can't say, well, this is what happened. So he said, I would have broken it off and thrown it out into the middle of the stall. You can see the stallion barn, picture of the stallion barn on my website in pictures. And so that's what my investigation revealed, amongst a lot of other things. So your questions are?
Well, a lot of questions. First, I'll start with this. You know, I'm certainly no horse killer. I'm not an investigator. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a veterinarian. But I'm not an idiot either. And to believe that a horse could kick a stall door to the point of breaking his leg like Alydar did, and leave not even a scuff or any evidence of any type of impact or kick whatsoever, is laughable as far as common sense goes. It just,
well, here, let me just interrupt you for a second to say there are marks on the door.
oh, okay.
The door, and this is what Tom Dixon said, well, there's all these kind of marks. But if you look at the marks, and the picture of that he took that night is there are no marks that are new. That door has been in there when Tim Tam was in that stall. That's the original barn door. And all the testimony is that Alydar was not a kicker, that he was a tapper with his front feet when he wanted a carrot. There's no evidence that he ever kicked before this, his stall door like that. And what everybody says is he wasn't that kind of horse. Why would he do that at 10 o'clock at night alone in his stall without any any stimulus whatsoever.
Right. Probably wouldn't. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that Dr. Bramlage believes his own theory?
Yes, I believe he does. I believe that, I interviewed him. He was nice enough to give me an interview. I think
he almost has to give you an interview.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. I mean, it would depend on how.
I think he loses a lot of credibility at this stage of the game if you show up there writing a book and want to talk to him about his theory, and he says, "No, I don't want to talk to you."
Well, I'll tell you, that's how it felt.
Okay.
When I was there, I mean, I went to an interview. Listen, I've interviewed probably 2,000 doctors in my cases. So I go there and I'm thinking, okay, we're going to go in and we're going to go in his office and have an interview, and I recorded it because, so we get there and he sits down in his waiting room where all these people are sitting around waiting for their horses to be seen. And he sits down and he has his hands crossed like this and he says, okay. And I'm like, this is where we're going to have the interview. And right away you're starting off on the wrong foot.
Right. Not a warm and cozy.
And I go, we're not having this in your office? And he goes, no, we're having it right here.
Okay.
And I was shocked. Now, in his office, it's filled with pictures of horses that he's treated. There's not a space on the wall it doesn't have. And incidentally, that's, I got my horses right here, boy.
I see him.
So it was not a pleasant interview. It was an argumentative interview. He would not come off any of the opinions. I asked him specifically, I said, did you feel any pressure to come up with an accident, given that this was Calumet and, this was 30? And he said, none. Now, to me, I can't believe that. There had to be pressure. Everybody else I interviewed said, yeah, there was pressure.
But you do believe, as an attorney and someone who investigated this, you do believe that he believes what he said, that he didn't come up with it due to pressure or something. You believe that Larry Bramlage, the renowned equine expert, believes that story that you and I can't get past the common sense element of.
Well, you have to understand, and I actually interviewed a lot of people who defended what he did. Remember, he's not there to investigate and put together a case. Okay. He comes, he does the surgery, and what's interesting, you're saying we don't believe, he didn't even write how the accident happened in his report to Lloyd's of London. There's nothing in there about how it happened. I got a call, I went there, I saw this break, I fixed it, it broke again, we euthanized it. So when Lloyd's, the crazy thing is that when Lloyd's is looking at this case, they have Tom Dixon saying he kicked the door, and they have Larry Bramlage saying nothing, and that's all they have.
I understand that. I understand that.
They pay on the broken leg. And when I asked Larry Bramlage, I said, listen, do you understand that people, so when Sports Illustrated wrote its article, Bill Mack said, the vets don't think that the horse could break his leg just kicking the stall door. And I said to him, this is from the Sports Illustrated article. Will you agree with me that regardless of what your opinion was, people believed what happened was that he just kicked the door, because that's what's here in Sports Illustrated? And he said, well, that's not what I would have told this guy or that guy. He basically said they didn't take down what he said correctly. You'll have to read the book to watch his cross-examination, because it was the most, disagreeable discussion I had with anybody. And it was frustrating because I wasn't in court. I couldn't control him saying, what he wanted to say, but I believe that he believes it. And I believe he has no other choice but to believe it after he said, nobody's going to come now. Nobody, not you, not me, and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to say something different now. After all this money has been paid and all of this lore.
Doesn't a veterinarian doctor have an obligation to protect animals and share all of their knowledge or insight into a situation if it possibly involves the intentional harming of a horse or any animal?
Well, it would if that's what
Ethically, morally?
it would. I agree with you, but I think in his mind, he went looking for a potential accident scenario, and he basically, once that's on paper, I think that's what he believes it. I think I never got the sense that he was lying or making something up. What I got was a guy who truly believed this and was going to defend it to the death, just like Tom Dixon. Tom Dixon, he believes he did a righteous investigation, despite the fact that when he was cross-examined in court, he kind of had to admit, I didn't do a whole lot, And what people say is about Larry Bramlage is, look, he went there, he did do what you say. He did do the best for the horse. If this were any other horse, they would have euthanized him after he broke his cannonbone. They did what's called heroic surgery. They were hoping that the 1 out of 100 times it would work. They were not optimistic. Lundy just said, look, we have to try something. So they tried it and it didn't work. So I think Larry did everything he could to do what he could to save the horse. I think that he believes what he says. And I will tell you, there are people that I interviewed that refused to believe it, that it was intentional. So, for example, Sandy Hatfield is, I think, the stallion manager at Three Chimneys now. And I tried to talk to her, and she said, "Listen, it was an accident, and that's all I know." And when they went to court, the lawyer said, "Now, ma'am, you find it impossible to believe that somebody would kill Alydar intentionally, don't you?" She said, "Yes. Even though it may have happened in other places, I can't." That's what their opinion is based on. It's not based on facts. It's based on an emotion that says nobody would do such a terrible thing to a horse. And the veterinarian, Linda Rhodes, felt the same way. And you really can't attack that opinion. But in the book, I do go through all the ways. And some people have told me, this was too much for me to read. But there was a law review article written about how often horses are killed for the insurance money, how little money that is. And when you look at Tommy Burns and what he did, guys were paying him $5,000 to kill their horse. And the people who paid him were millionaires. They didn't need the money. And I asked Tommy, why would somebody, if you love this equestrian horse, why do you do this? He just said, hey, it's greed. It's not wanting to have look like you made a mistake when you bought a horse. But whenever we have a situation where there's a horse that is worth a lot of money and nobody has any money, and that's their only asset, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Troublesome story in totality when you look at everything, the financial aspect. Now, Lundy ultimately was convicted of insurance fraud, correct?
Yeah, correct. And that was involving the bank. He did a lot of deals that were somewhat kind of a bribe.
Right.
And the guy Chiak at the bank, they had to keep him there. And if he wanted to get $1 million tax deduction on December 29th, they would do the paperwork for him to get that, even though, the money didn't happen.
How much time did he go? He went to jail, correct?
Yes.
How much time did he do?
I don't remember. It was, it wasn't a tremendous amount of time, but it was time.
Okay. And now he
got out, and he's kind of a hermit now, I think.
But still, is he well thought of in the Lexington community, or?
Well, I got the impression that people felt sorry for him in a way. I think his defense in all these cases was, I'm a dumb farmer and you're the sophisticated bank and you bamboozled me into doing this. That was his defense. And interestingly enough, it was not bought by the jury. The jury was out only an hour before before they convicted both he and Gary.
But he was never actually convicted of killing Alydar.
No. And they tried to convict him with Dr. Pratt, the guy who did the calculations of how much, how much force it would require a stallion to kick, because he had to have him kick 3 feet above. You don't kick the very bottom of the door. You kick where you kick. And, if the bolts were there and they were certain strength, it would have called, a stallion could not kick the door that hard. The problem was the bolts were rusty. And so he couldn't really, and, there were a lot of other problems there. They had a time crunch where they couldn't really have a full trial because they only had an hour for the sentencing. And so, it was really, they were really going through things really fast. And it was really just a rehash, except for Dr. Pratt, of what had happened in previous trials. So
I can't wait to read the book. We're going to put a link to the book and your website on here. I'm assuming you interviewed John Veach, who recently passed.
I did.
Okay. What was his take on the death of Alydar? And then we'll kind of segue into Alydar's racing career and some things about that.
Okay. So the interesting story about John Veach is he loved Alydar more than himself. When he became Calumet's trainer, they wanted him to bring Calumet back to the 50s and 60s when they had, 8 Kentucky Derby winners and 3 Triple Crown winners. And there was a lot of pressure on him. And the love that he had for Alydar was even seen by other people. So, for example, Lewis Wolfson, who owned Affirmed, his son actually said, when I see those two people, Alydar and Veach together, it's a magical feeling. You can feel the love between them, and everybody should feel that. Everybody should be able to see how that is. I initially interviewed John Veach early, 3 years ago, and he basically said he absolutely thought it was intentional. He had heard of Crowbar, he had heard of other things. We really didn't know. He was very bitter about J.T. Lundy taking over Calumet because it was a very high-class institution, and all of a sudden it was just, new money being spent on everything. I mean, they spent $50 million on Secreto and Capote, and those horses never did anything.
Right.
So then, as the book was finished about, a couple months ago, and I thought, what? I'd like John to read it, because if there's something wrong in there about what I wrote about the horsing, his racing career, he'll be able to say, hey, that's wrong. So I sent it to him. I printed out a copy and sent it to him via FedEx. And he called me up and he said, man, this is the best book I've ever read. He said, I don't know how you got to talk to all these people. You got all these people to talk to you, and you got to talk to Bramlage. I really liked what you had to say to him. I'm going to give this to all of my friends for Christmas presents, and I really appreciate that I now know what really happened instead of all of the rumors and everything else. So I said, John, that's great. We're on the phone, but I need it in writing, because I needed to put on, the cover, and it will go on the cover, is what he said. He said, okay. So he called me back and we recorded it. And 4 days later, he died.
Oh.
And I was like, wow. I mean, if I hadn't sent it to him and he hadn't read it, it would have been such a terrible thing. So I said to myself, if he's the only one that ever read it and liked it and said, I'm happy with it, that's all I need, because he's the guy I cared about to know about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I also sent a copy to the exercise rider, Charlie Rose, because he was in it too. He's still alive. And he said he couldn't put it down, but I mean, he's in it.
Right.
So, why not? But,
I can't wait. I can't wait to read it. It's funny because they say you are what your record says you are. And
That's not true of Alydar. That's not
uh,
true of Alydar.
we'll get to that, but I always use the example to substantiate that in racing with the Sunday Silence Easy Goer rivalry. Now I was an East Coast guy, and most of the East Coast guys will argue that Easy Goer was the better horse, and they'll and I'll say, listen, Sunday Silence beat him 3 out of 4 times on the square.
Yeah.
You are what your record says you are.
Yeah.
But I've always felt, as great a horse as Affirmed was, that Alydar was the better of the two. And I was very surprised, that Affirmed was able to beat him in the Belmont Stakes when he got ahead of him.
Yeah.
Now, you got to realize back then I was going to the racetrack all the time. I was a huge fan. I knew Laz Barrera. I knew his brother, Oscar Barrera. I knew his brother, Willie Barrera. And I don't know how much you know about the Oscar Barrera stories and history of Oscar and alleged illegal juicing or doping of horses that occurred after that. I can tell you this for a fact, that Oscar, whatever he may have been doing, did not begin when he became very prominent, and it became very well known. Oscar and some big bettors, and one in particular that I know, had pointed out to me years before it became prevalent that this guy Oscar Barrera, when he claims a horse, he doesn't claim many, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 a year, but when he does, they always win when he runs them back. And if they work 3 furlongs a day or 2 before he runs them back, they never lose. So I was aware of it a little bit before it became very popular. I also knew his mannerisms and knew him to talk to, and there was always something that stuck out to me about that Belmont Stakes that may or may not mean anything, but you're an attorney, you're an investigative journalist, author, and I'm going to share it with you. When Alydar got beaten at Belmont Stakes, if you watch Affirmed being led into the winner's circle by the Wolfsons and Laz Barrera, and Steve Cauthen, the kid sensation on there, and a Triple Crown winner. If you watch that celebratory scene going into the Belmont Stakes, Oscar Barrera is in it. And he is fist pumping, and super psyched up and celebrating as if he trained the horse. Now, it was his brother, so you can certainly make the argument that he was happy for his brother. Absolutely can. But you hear all these allegations today about horses re-breaking when they're on juices and coming again and just doing things that are not normally done by a racehorse. Oscar, when he used to, in his heyday, win with these off the claim horses and these horses on the rise up and these horses, running just off track records at a cheap claiming races, and 1.25 mile horses that were plotters going to the lead, sprinting 3 days off the claim, these things that just you couldn't defy logically. You would see a lot of that fist pumping and that same type of celebration that you see in the Belmont Stakes. And I always, when I saw it and caught it, I spoke to a very close friend of mine about it, who also saw it and caught it. We used to go to the racetrack all the time together back then. And he and I just had the same reaction, where it really makes you wonder, if you were a true student of the game and handicapper like we were and still are, and you watch that race and you mirror their 2 careers, it just makes you wonder. if Oscar was a cheater, which was never proven, it's just assumed. I don't know for sure, but if he was, it makes you wonder, was any help given to Affirmed that day in that race, which gave him that, you know, miraculous surge of energy to come back going 1.5 miles for the first time on the inside, and come back and beat a horse that had collared him. It's just something that you don't see very often. Now, it could just be Affirmed was truly a spectacular horse. I
have a story about that.
Oh, can't wait to hear.
I interviewed Steve Cauthen for the book.
Okay.
And I talked to him about the Belmont. And what he told me was that he was never worried about losing to Alydar except in the Belmont. And when they were coming down in the stretch run, he asked Affirmed for speed, and he was out of gas. And he was freaked. He was like, "Oh my God, this has never happened before. I'm asking for speed. He's got nothing." And at the same time, now remember, Alydar hadn't changed leads either.
Right.
So that was another.
I think only in the Whitney. I think it was the Whitney the only race he ever changed leads in.
Yes. I think he would have changed leads in the Travers if he hadn't been fouled.
Right.
But anyway, so while they're coming down the wire, Steve Cauthen is saying, "Oh my God, we're going to lose." And at the same time, Velasquez is trying to crowd him over the rail, hoping that it'll kind of slow the horse down. And as they do that, and you go back and you look at some of the pictures of the finish, you'll see this is true. He can't use his crop with his right hand. So he says, "Well, I'm going to have to go to my left hand." And right before they get to the wire, he hits him with his left on the left side. And it so surprises Affirmed that he jumps forward and wins. And I said to Steve Cauthen, I said, "Is this something that you planned this? I mean, this sounds, it's a great story." He said, "No, it's not that I planned it. It's just that's what happened, and that's the explanation." But to me, when you watch that, you can see that it's true. That down at the wire, he switches to the left crop. I think if Alydar had switched leads, he would have won that race. But I do think Alydar was a less versatile horse. I think he had one tool, and that was the stretch run. It was a great tool. But Affirmed could run from the front. He could run from the middle. He had more tools. And I do think that he would have, that Alydar would have beat Affirmed into Travers, because at the time, the foul, he was going so fast and coming on the inside, I think he would have passed him, and I don't think Affirmed would have been able to react. Alydar did beat him in the Champagne Stakes. And in that race, Alydar was on the far outside, and Affirmed was, near the rail, and Derby Creek Road was right next to him. And so Affirmed was a horse that would loaf on the lead. Like if he was in the lead and there was nobody pushing him, that's as fast as he'd go. And according to Cauthen, the only horse that could make him run full out was Alydar. And that's what makes the rivalry so good, is it brought out the best in both horses. No
question. No question.
And so as they're coming down in the Champagne, Affirmed is worried about it, Derby Creek Road, and then Alydar.
I couldn't see Alydar.
Couldn't see him. And last, he got on Cauthen. He said, "Listen, I don't want you looking at any other horse than Alydar when you're in these races. I don't care about Derby Creek Road. He's not the guy that's going to beat you." Right. So, yeah, there's some interesting.
And that goes back to what we touched on early. That being one of the great rivalries in racing. It really was. And while Affirmed may have gotten the better of him on the racetrack, I think in the breeding shed, and it's a shame, Alydar's fate. But I think Alydar certainly got the better of Affirmed in the breeding shed.
What I say in the book is that Alydar beat Affirmed by a much larger margin in the breeding shed that Affirmed beat him on the track.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, he had Ali Sheba, he had Easy Goer, Turkoman, Criminal Type.
Oh, a whole slew
Yeah.
of no pun intended, a whole slew of great lines out of Alydar. You know, I remember I was up there that summer at Saratoga, and I remember, that monstrous Whitney that he ran when he changed leads against older horses. And I remember going to the Travers that day and being super excited because I was an Alydar fan.
Yeah.
I thought he was the better of the two horses, and I was frustrated at the trips. And as a handicapper, I knew he was always at a disadvantage because he was coming from so far off the pace.
Yeah.
And I loved in the Belmont when George moved him early and got him in the game at 1.5 miles.
I think they should have done that more often.
I agree. But I don't think they could have at the shorter distances. At the 1.5 miles they could. But then he did kind of realize that, because in the Travers he did make that super early move again, which he didn't do in the Derby and some other races.
And that go ahead.
He was a more recent example was Zenyatta. People would compare Zenyatta to Rachel Alexandra. They never raced, but Rachel had that tactical speed advantage. Zenyatta, those deep closes are always subject to the trip and the pace and making up that ground. And Alydar was in that position against Affirmed, but I really thought his day to really get him on the square was in the Travers.
Everybody thought, I'm telling you that.
And when that happened, I was like, oh no.
Yeah. John Veach said he was more disappointed with that loss than any other loss, and he was more confident of going into the Travers than any race he'd ever been in.
Well, I could see it out of that Whitney. Yeah, you had to be. You had to be.
And there's another thing that came out in his racing career that you probably know because you're in it, but Alydar got hit with a clod of dirt in the Kentucky Derby and fell back 17 lengths and then came back to scrabble to second place.
Right.
And and nobody knew it at the time. Now that would never happen today because there'd be cameras everywhere and everything else.
Right. Everybody
at that time, Charlie Rose brought Alydar back to have the urine test, and he looked at his eye and it was just caked with dirt. And his eye was closed, and they were actually worried he wouldn't run the Preakness because of that. And so, he told John Veach, and John Veach told Lucio Marchi. And she said, listen, we're not going to say anything about it. We're not going to be crybabies. Affirmed won. We're just going to go on to the next race. And it didn't come out to a decade later that happened. And Steve Cauthen didn't even know it when I interviewed him. And then he said to me when I said, I've been hit with a clod of dirt, and man, it's like being hit with a baseball bat.
Yeah. No, a lot of people don't realize what that kickback is like when you're in a race. And when you're in a race like the Derby with such a large field and so many horses and that dirt flying back at you, it's not fun, I'm sure. That's why
you want to run from the front.
Absolutely. Right. Best instructions you could ever give is go to the front and improve your position from there. I mean, that's it.
What I love is, you always think that the trainers give some real specific instructions to the jockeys when they get on their horse. Not from what I've read. Not from what I said.
Some do.
Go fast and stay out of trouble.
Right. Some do. Right. Absolutely. I'm sure there's a ton more in the book. I encourage people to read it. I mean, I feel like this was a great unfiltered episode of Past the Wire TV. I think we got the real story of Alydar out there. But as you can attest to, there's probably a ton more of stuff in the book that's it's a tragic and fascinating story at the same time. It's part of racing history. I think it's good that people are aware of the story. A lot of people that are into the sport now weren't around back then. So by reading this book, you can appreciate the glory days of racing and the rivalries that we had, because Affirmed Alydar was just one of several. And you could also get a window into what can happen when things go bad and greed is involved and big money is involved, because there are some people that simply dismiss allegations as nonsense. That doesn't go on today, that doesn't happen anymore. I wrote a series of articles about the race fixing scandals in the 70s and what they were doing, and I looked at betting patterns and convictions and this and that, and big top name riders that were involved. And history has a tendency to repeat itself. You know what I mean? So the more we know,
those same issues are still there. People, money, horses.
Correct. So knowing what's happened gives us a window into what can happen, what is likely to happen again, and maybe helps us stop it. You know what I mean? And helps us prevent it and look into it. From your perspective, let's close with this, Fred. From your perspective, HISA, the changes in racing, where do you see the current state of racing, and how do you see it moving forward, and what are the most important issues that it has to tackle and resolve in order to sustain itself and maybe even return to a mainstream sport? It wasn't long ago, okay, that racing was the most popular spectator sport in the country. Okay, maybe the 80s. I think it was the early 80s. Racing was the most popular spectator sport in the United States. You say that now in 2023, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I think society has changed. I think I've seen it as an animal lawyer. Back in the day, you'd get a dog, you'd put them in the backyard, that'd be it. Now dogs are in the house, they're sleeping on your bed. The whole theory of animal welfare is coming out, and so clearly there are bigger groups that are concerned. They're not bettors. They're people that are concerned about the welfare of the horses, and so there are some people that will never be happy with horse racing. If the horse doesn't choose to race and he doesn't have his own self-agency to decide that, they're never going to be for it. But for those who like to watch horses run, there are a lot of things that can be done, and some of them are already being done. I think there's need to be the first thing I think they need to do is I think they need to make a social security for horses, so that while the horses are making money, that a certain amount of that money gets taken out and put in a fund for aftercare when they need it. I mean, some of these horses don't need aftercare. They're secretariat, they're, whatever. But a lot of the horses aren't. And they're at old friends. And there's a lot of places popped up for, take care of retired racehorses. But it's not that the money's not there. It's that it's being spent by the owners. So they've started in Japan, where now every time a horse races, there's a certain percentage taken out for aftercare. I think there has to be more control over jockeys, how they handle horses. How many times can you hit a horse when he's in last place coming down the stretch? And they've tried that. They're already starting to do that in England. I think here some too.
They're doing it here. Notice that's very highly regulated here, and it's a highly controversial subject. A lot of riders and a lot of people in the industry are very much against it.
Yeah, because the jockeys are saying we need to control the horses, and that's true. And if all this was simple, it would be finished already. I mean, we'd have it solved. I think there also needs to be federal laws that cover every single state, and everything about the performance-enhancing drugs has to be the same in every race. I don't know why we're having such trouble allowing Congress to do that. I guess people feel like more government is bad. But for the horses, it's ridiculous to go to one race and you can use this, another race you can use that. I think there needs to be more research into the long-term uses of this, and I think there has to be less use. As I talked to Charlie Rose, he said, "Look, you know, if we had a sore horse, we didn't inject him or anything. We let him rest." Okay,
Right.
so that's the answer. Don't inject, rest. And I think the problem is there's too much money at stake, and I don't really know how you solve that. It really, whenever you leave an industry to police itself, it never works. And that's
I'm amazed because you and I think alike on so many issues. Not everyone, but on so many, it's uncanny, really, because like I've spoken many times and written articles about, you know, how self-policing, you know, has failed epically in racing.
Everything.
Yeah. Well, I don't know much about anything except horse racing, so you have a big advantage over me. You know, one of the things I always say, if it wasn't in the racing form, I probably don't know about it. People say, "Hey, do you hear about this? You hear about that?" I'm like, there was nothing in the form about that. You know, so I usually don't know. I'm going to steal something from you. Don't inject, rest.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I use that regularly?
No, use it, man.
I'm going to steal it, or if you give it to me, that's even better.
I'll give it to you.
That's even better. I took way too much of your time, but you're a fascinating man. You wrote a fascinating book.
Let me say one more thing. Okay.
You can say anything.
All right. I want to close with this because it's very important to me. And that is, I wrote this book for Alydar. I felt like I didn't want him to be known as, oh, he's the second place to Affirmed in a Triple Crown in 1978. He's so much more than that. His racing career, his personality. You'll read stories in the book about him meeting the Queen of England. I mean, and things that he did. And so my goal was to say to people, listen, there's more to him than being the second place guy. The second reason I wrote it was because I wanted people to know what happened, not what they thought happened, what some guy said happened, that the mafia did it. This is, you know, if you want to know all the facts, they're in the book. And that's what you're going to make your decision on. And you can go so far as read the book and then go on my website and say, this is my verdict, because I think this is what happened. But third, and most importantly, there are people out there that know something. There are people out there that somebody talked to or saw something, and I'm hoping that this shakes out somebody who can tell us something more.
I agree. I think we owe it to the industry, okay, to do that. And I'm glad you said it. And if anybody reads the book or sees this show and knows anything, you know, you owe it to the industry, and you owe it to that magnificent animal and racehorse to speak up and let the truth be known. My verdict about what happened was made many years ago. I can't wait to read your book. I don't think it's going to change my mind based on our conversation. You know, the people that were involved, if it is the way that I believe it is, and I suspect you believe it is, if that is the truth of the matter, these people have to live with that, and that's a bigger burden than I think they even realize. You know, ignorance is bliss, they say, but that's a bigger burden than
nobody came out of this. None of the people that we've talked about, Lundy, McGee, none of these guys have turned out to have great lives.
Right.
Gary Matthews got disbarred. You know, so it's not like, I guess the one thing is that you can say is that nobody in the end can gain from it in any kind of way.
No, no.
And
You know, also,
I guess
a lot of I always
that's-
laugh about a lot of the old cliches being true.
Yeah.
And one of the old ones is crime doesn't pay.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, and a tragic footnote to the story is, you know, the devil's red and blue colors of Calumet Farm are gone. The current Calumet Farm with the black and gold.
Yeah.
Someone like me and my friends and the people from my era, we don't consider that the old Calumet. We consider
It's
that
not.
a new farm. You know, it's a new farm and a new business. It's not, you know, the Calumet that raced all those horses. And we only mentioned a couple because the list is, I can name 30 of them off the top of my head. But you know, it's a different form. But the tragic footnote is that this poor heir and all the heirs were bankrupted by mishandling of an empire of wealth. That someone like me can only dream of being involved in and taking pride in. And I mean, what I would do to run a farm like Calumet, there is no way it would go bankrupt. You know, I can assure you of that. And I don't even have a high school education. I'm a high school dropout, and I would run that farm better than this guy did. But I mean, this woman worked as a chambermaid, okay? And she was the heir to the Calumet fortune. You're not talking rich, you're talking wealth. You know, and there's a significant difference between being rich and being wealthy. You know, Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The guy that pays him and writes his checks is wealthy. So you know, it's just an unbelievable story. I'm so glad you wrote it, Fred. I'm so glad I got to meet you. I think it's fascinating. You're a fascinating guy. I think you do a lot of good.
It's been glad to meet you.
I can't wait to read the book.
Maybe we'll get together sometime.
To read it. Oh, be my pleasure. Absolutely be my
Go
pleasure.
to racing.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. I'll end the recording now. We'll say goodbye off camera, and I wish you nothing but the best, and you know, much gratitude to you for doing what you did and putting the time and effort into, you know, getting all those facts together and talking to all those people and really developing, you know, this story and telling it the way that it needs to be told. Phenomenal job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Tracking trips with Pick Six King John Stetton. It's one of the best tools in horse racing for any level of player. It's your second set of eyes, spotting troubled trips, betting angles, track trends, horses to watch and favorites to fade, 10 figs, ticket structure, and more. At Tracking Trips, you're a friend with benefits. Not a member? You must hate winning money. Join Tracking Trips now. Visit pastthewire.com and we'll see you in the winner's circle. Remember, nobody does it better.
They're off in the Curlin, Florida Derby. After 3 quarters in 112-1, Known Agenda is now on to take over the lead. It's Known Agenda for St. Elias Stable. Florida Derby winner,
known agenda.
Dan Oman here with some exciting news. DRF Formulator, the gold standard in past performance information, is now free exclusively on DRF Bets. Join DRF Bets with the promo code WINNING. Get a $250 first deposit match bonus, a $10 free bet, and free Formulator already uploaded to your account. Access Formulator's premium features, including sortable trainer stats, race replays, personalized trip notes, and lots more. Free Formulator exclusively on DRF Bets.
Nobody does it better.